Uganda's economy shrank in 2020, the first time in more than a decade, owing to the adverse effects of the COVID-19 lockdown and the negative spillover from the global economic downturn, especially the disruption of demand and supply chains. According to analysis of the Uganda Bureau of Statistics data, gross domestic product, the market value of all the finished goods and services produced within the borders, fell by 1.2% in the 12 months to December last year. The services sector was the most affected by the slowdown in activity in 2020, shrinking by 3.2% on the year basis to 54 trillion shillings and down from the 7.3% increase registered in 2019. The Finance Ministry is projecting a fiscal deficit when government's expenditure exceeds its revenue in a year to widen to 8.6%, up from 7.9% in the last financial year of 2019-2020 and 4.9% in the financial year 2018-2019. As a result, government has had to borrow considerably to plug this deficit. This borrowing, varying from concessional, semi-concessional and non-concessional, has heightened the current's risk to debt sustainability to the extent that 55% of revenues collected go to debt servicing, often creating a crisis of liquidity shortage and more borrowing. Such was the case last year in November, in the midst of the election, when the Treasury ring-fenced all available money for State House, Electoral Commission, the Defense Ministry, and payment of salaries, wages and pension, and debt servicing and interest repayment. As a result, the fiscal deficit for the first half of this financial year, 2020-2021, was financed through borrowing from the domestic and external sources to plug the hole. Government received loan disbursements from donors amounting to 3.6 trillion shillings, of which 1.3 trillion shillings was in form of budget support and 2.1 trillion shillings as loans tagged to specific projects. During the period, government borrowed another 4.2 trillion shillings from the domestic market to finance key priorities. Policy documents seen by NTV revealed that the accelerated borrowing, especially from the domestic market, crowded out the private sector from being considered for loans, while at the same time has increased the country's vulnerabilities to the debt outlook.
I wouldn't say our debt is manageable because the cost of servicing that debt is rising day after day. First of all, we are seeing a shift from our traditional lenders who used to offer loans to us at concessional rates of about 2% from the World Bank and IMF, and now we are shifting to private lenders. We are shifting to the private markets. When I say the private markets, Uganda is borrowing from the domestic market at very high rates. About 14%. Those are the coupons we are paying. What I mean by that, we are actually incurring a lot on servicing our domestic debt as compared to what we actually spent prior on servicing our traditional debt that we owe to our traditional lenders.
Chibowa, the Financing for Development Officer at SEATINI, an NGO that specializes in trade and policy advocacy, says government could benefit from self-inspection.
We're already in a crisis. Increasing taxes will actually affect our businesses, which are already challenged. So that government is actually facing a real challenge when it comes to fiscal adjustment. Yeah, it can't actually increase taxes at the moment, but it can look at maybe reprioritizing in this current moment. What I mean by that is that maybe resources that were actually being spent on other issues can now be diverted and reprioritized.